My name is Alaric Marlowe, 42 years old, and for nearly a decade I served as Chief Technology Architect at Nexara Systems in downtown San Francisco. If you knew me back then, you'd describe me as methodical, almost obsessively careful about system security and data integrity. I wasn't the guy who spoke up in every meeting or cracked jokes by the coffee machine. I was the one who stayed late, who double-checked everything, who made sure the foundation held strong while others built their castles on top. For 9 years, I poured my life into Nexara Systems. I created their core platform from scratch, writing every line of code that would eventually transform a struggling startup into a tech powerhouse worth hundreds of millions. My work was invisible to most people in the company, buried deep in servers and databases, where only I understood the intricate architecture that kept everything running. But when quarterly reports showed profit margins climbing year after year, when client satisfaction scores hit record highs, when our system handled traffic that should have crashed lesser platforms, that was my handiwork speaking. The executives knew my value, of course. They just preferred to think of it as replaceable. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. Everything changed on the night of September 13th, 2024, at the Fairmont Hotel's Grand Ballroom in San Francisco. Nexara Systems was hosting their annual corporate gala, celebrating the biggest contract in company history, $800 million from an international client based in Singapore. The deal had taken 18 months to close, and my platform was the centerpiece that sealed it. As I stood on that stage, holding a crystal trophy engraved with Innovator of the Year, camera flashes popping around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years working for Nexara Systems. Pride, maybe. Recognition, finally. But even as I smiled for the photographers, I noticed something odd. Jeremy Cole, our chief operating officer, was standing near the back of the ballroom, arms crossed, checking his phone instead of applauding. His expression wasn't celebratory. It was calculating, cold, like a man watching a problem that would soon solve itself. I should have trusted that instinct immediately. The next morning, I was checking my personal email over breakfast when I saw something that made my coffee go cold. There, in my inbox, was a message that had been mistakenly forwarded to my personal account instead of staying within corporate channels. The subject line read, "Effective termination, Alaric Marlowe, September 15, 2024. The timestamp showed it had been composed 2 weeks earlier, right around the time we'd gotten final approval on the Singapore contract. I opened the email and read through Jeremy's clinical language describing my redundancy following successful project completion and his recommendation for immediate transition to reduce operational overhead. The termination date was set for just 1 day away. They'd planned to fire me 24 hours after the gala, once the contract was safely signed and my usefulness had expired. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at that email, and something shifted inside me. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more focused. For 9 years I'd been the invisible foundation holding up their empire. Now they wanted to kick out the supports and see if the building would stand without me. I decided to let them try. I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my Nob Hill apartment, looking out at the fog rolling over San Francisco Bay. Most people in my position would have stormed into the office, demanding explanations, maybe threatening lawsuits. But I'd learned something valuable during my years in Silicon Valley. Emotion is the enemy of strategy. If Jeremy and the board wanted to play chess, I needed to think several moves ahead. The truth was, I'd been sensing something off for weeks before that email confirmed my suspicions. There had been closed-door meetings I wasn't invited to, hushed conversations that stopped when I walked into the break room, and most telling of all, an intern named David had mentioned overhearing my name during an HR conference call that mysteriously wasn't on my calendar. When you've been in corporate America as long as I have, you develop instincts about these things. The signs were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to an inevitable conclusion. But here's what Jeremy and his cronies didn't understand about me. I'd been preparing for betrayal since the day I started at Nexara Systems, Not because I'm paranoid, but because I'm practical. In the tech industry, loyalty flows one direction until the quarterly earnings call changes everything. So while they were planning my exit strategy, I'd been quietly building my insurance policy. 6 months earlier, I'd started developing what I called my shadow architecture, a completely independent version of the Nexara Systems platform, built from the ground up using my own methodologies and registered under my personal LLC. Every innovation I'd created for the company had a parallel version that belonged solely to me. I worked on it during lunch breaks, on weekends, in the early morning hours before anyone else arrived at the office. The code was cleaner, more efficient, and most importantly, it was mine. But that wasn't my only precaution. During the contract negotiations with our Singapore client, I'd insisted on including a seemingly innocuous technical clause buried deep in the 47-page agreement. Section 12.3.7 stated that system execution and maintenance requires continuous oversight by the original architect chief of the designated platform. To most people, including Jeremy, it read like standard legal boilerplate about technical support. In reality, it meant that if I wasn't actively supervising the system, the client had grounds to void the entire contract. I'd also been meticulously documenting everything. Every commit to the company's GitHub repository included my digital signature and timestamp. Every major architectural decision had corresponding emails where I'd outlined the technical reasoning, copied to multiple department heads. Every late-night bug fix, every performance optimization, every security patch, all of it created an undeniable paper trail proving that Alaric Marlowe was the brain behind Nexara Systems' success. The morning after I received that termination email, I put my plan into motion. First, I quietly transferred copies of all my personal documentation to a secure server I'd been maintaining in Oregon. Then I sent a carefully worded message to 3 key members of my team, developers I'd hired and trained personally, people who understood the true complexity of what we'd built together. The message was simple. Thinking about starting something new. Would you be interested in hearing more? All 3 responded within 2 hours. Sarah Chen, my lead database architect, was frustrated with Nexara Systems' bureaucracy. Marcus Rodriguez, our security specialist, had been passed over for promotion twice despite his exceptional work, and Janet Thompson, our UX designer, had been complaining for months that the company was stifling her creativity. They were ready for change, and more importantly, they trusted me. Meanwhile, I maintained perfect normalcy at the office. I attended my scheduled meetings, responded to emails promptly, and continued optimizing the platform as if nothing had changed. Jeremy would walk past my desk and nod cordially, probably thinking about how smoothly his plan was proceeding. If he'd looked closely, he might have noticed that I was copying certain files to external drives, or that I was having unusually long conversations with team members near the elevator bank, where security cameras had blind spots. But Jeremy wasn't detail-oriented like I was. That would be his downfall. On September 14, 2024, the day before my scheduled termination, I did something that would prove crucial later. I sent a routine maintenance report to our Singapore client, copying their technical team on system specifications and performance metrics. Hidden within that 20-page document was a subtle note about the upcoming administrative transition and a recommendation that they review Section 12.3.7 of their contract for clarity on continuity requirements. To them, it would look like standard due diligence. To me, it was lighting the fuse. That evening, I had dinner at Swan Oyster Depot on Polk Street, one of my favorite quiet spots in the city. I ordered their Dungeness crab and a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, and I thought about the next chapter of my career. By this time tomorrow, I'd be officially unemployed. But I'd also be free to build something that truly belonged to me, with people who valued what I brought to the table. I paid my check, walked home through the crisp September air, and slept better than I had in months. Tomorrow, Jeremy Cole would discover that firing Alaric Marlowe was the most expensive mistake Nexara Systems had ever made. September 15, 2024, arrived with typical San Francisco fog. thick and gray, rolling in from the Pacific like a blanket over the city. I woke up at 7 a.m., made my usual French press coffee, and checked my phone. No messages from Nexara Systems, which meant they were sticking to their timeline. By 9 a.m., I'd be officially unemployed, and Jeremy would begin discovering just how thoroughly he'd miscalculated. At exactly 8:30, I tried logging into my corporate email account. Access denied. My keycard for the building, deactivated. Even my company laptop had been remotely wiped clean. They'd executed their plan with military precision, cutting me off from Nexara Systems completely. I had to admire their efficiency, even as I prepared to watch it backfire spectacularly. The first sign of trouble came at 10:15. My personal phone rang, and I saw Jeremy's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again, and again. By 11 a.m., he'd left me 17 missed calls and 3 increasingly frantic voicemails. The last one simply said, "Alaric, call me back immediately. We have a situation." I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited. The situation, as I later learned, had started at 9:30 that morning when Nexara Systems attempted to conduct their first post-contract technical review with the Singapore client. The meeting was supposed to be a formality, a quick walkthrough of system capabilities to reassure them that everything would continue running smoothly. Instead, it turned into a disaster. Without me there to explain the platform's intricate architecture, the presentation team had relied on simplified PowerPoint slides and generic talking points. When the client's technical director asked about database optimization protocols, they gave him marketing speak. When he inquired about our security encryption methods, they deflected with promises to follow up with detailed documentation. Most damaging of all, when he asked to speak directly with the architect chief mentioned in Section 12.3.7, they had to admit that person was no longer with the company. The Singapore client immediately requested a copy of their contract and spent the next hour on a conference call with their legal team. At 2 p.m. Pacific Time, Nexara Systems received a formal notice of contract termination, citing breach of continuity requirements. $800 million gone in a single afternoon. Jeremy's 18th call came at 2:45. This time, I answered. "Alaric, thank God," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding about your departure." "Has there?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, because the email I received seemed pretty clear about effective termination dates. That email. "Look, there were discussions about restructuring, but nothing was finalized. We can work this out. The Singapore deal hit a snag, and we need your expertise to smooth things over." I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before responding. "Jeremy, you fired me this morning. My access is revoked, my equipment is confiscated, and according to your own documentation, I'm officially redundant following successful project completion. I'm not sure how I can help you now. We can reinstate you immediately. Full benefits, maybe even a promotion to CTO. Just help us fix this situation with Singapore." "I appreciate the offer," I said, watching a sailboat navigate through the fog toward Sausalito. "But I don't think there's anything left to fix. They canceled the contract because you violated the continuity clause. That's not a technical problem, it's a legal one." The call ended with Jeremy promising to make this right and threatening legal action in the same breath. I turned off my phone and went for a walk through Golden Gate Park, enjoying the crisp September air and the freedom of unemployment. By Tuesday morning, September 17, 2024, the tech blogs had picked up the story. TechCrunch ran a piece titled, "Nexara Systems loses 800 miners contract hours after firing key architect." The article didn't mention me by name, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. The comments section was brutal, filled with former employees sharing their own stories about Nexara Systems' toxic management culture and short-sighted business decisions. The stock market reacted predictably. Nexara Systems shares, which had been trading at $93 on Friday, opened Tuesday at $56 and kept falling. By closing bell, they'd lost 38% of their market value in less than 72 hours. Investment firms started downgrading their recommendations, and two major shareholders called for emergency board meetings. Wednesday brought the resignation announcements. First, the chief financial officer stepped down to pursue other opportunities. Then the head of business development left for personal reasons. By the following Monday, 3 more executives had abandoned ship, leaving Jeremy to face an increasingly hostile board of directors who wanted explanations for how their biggest deal in company history had evaporated overnight. Meanwhile, I was having lunch meetings with Sarah, Marcus, and Janet, discussing our new venture over dim sum in Chinatown. We'd decided to call it Marlowe Logic Systems, and we already had our first potential client, a competitor of Nexara Systems who'd been watching the drama unfold with great interest. They wanted to know if we could build them something similar to the Nexara Systems platform, but more reliable and with better long-term support guarantees. "We can do better than similar," I told them during our initial pitch meeting. "We can build something revolutionary." The irony wasn't lost on me. Nexara Systems had fired me to save money on overhead, only to lose $800 million and their entire reputation in the process. They'd kept the shell of my platform, but lost the person who understood how it actually worked. It was like buying a Formula One race car but firing the only mechanic who knew how to maintain the engine. 3 weeks after my termination, I received one final call from Jeremy. He was calling from his personal phone this time, not the corporate line. "The board is asking questions," he said, his voice hollow and defeated. "They want to know why the contract included that clause about the original architect. They're saying I should have known." "You should have," I replied simply. "Is there any way? Could we work out some kind of consulting arrangement? Maybe you could help transition the platform to our new team." I looked out at the fog rolling over Twin Peaks, thinking about all those late nights I'd spent building something I thought would last, all the innovations I'd contributed to a company that saw me as disposable. "Jeremy," I said finally, "there's nothing left to transition. Without proper oversight, your platform is just expensive code that nobody understands. Frankly, that's not my problem anymore." I hung up and never heard from him again. 6 months after my termination from Nexara Systems, I was sitting in a glass conference room on the 32nd floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, signing the biggest contract of my career. It was March 2025, and Marlowe Logic Systems had just secured a $12 million deal with Cascade Industries to build their next-generation supply chain platform. The irony was delicious. Cascade had been one of Nexara Systems' biggest competitors, and now they were paying me to create something that would put my former company even further behind. Sarah looked across the mahogany table at me and smiled. As my new chief technology officer, she was earning $210,000 annually, plus equity in a company that actually valued her contributions. Marcus, now our head of security, had just been featured in Wired magazine for his innovative approach to blockchain authentication, and Janet had already won 2 design awards for the user interface she'd created for our flagship product. The team I'd assembled wasn't just talented, they were hungry to prove what they could accomplish when they weren't held back by corporate bureaucracy. "So, what's next?" Sarah asked as we walked out of the Cascade building into the crisp March air. "We've got 3 major clients lined up, venture capital firms calling every week, and headhunters trying to poach us for executive positions at Fortune 500 companies." I pulled out my phone and showed her an article from that morning's San Francisco Chronicle. The headline read, "Nexara Systems files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection." The company that had once been valued at over $2 billion was now selling its assets to pay creditors. Their stock, which had traded at $93 the week I was fired, closed yesterday at $4.12. "Justice," I said simply. The article detailed Nexara Systems' complete collapse over the past 6 months. After losing the Singapore contract, they'd failed to secure any major new deals. Their existing clients had grown nervous about the company's stability and started looking elsewhere for technical support. 3 separate class action lawsuits had been filed by shareholders who claimed the board had misrepresented the company's prospects. Most damaging of all, a former employee had leaked internal documents showing that executives had awarded themselves millions in bonuses while laying off engineers and support staff. Jeremy Cole's name appeared only once in the article, in a brief mention that he'd left the company to pursue opportunities in the non-profit sector. I later learned through mutual contacts that he'd taken a job managing IT for a small charity in Portland, making about $75,000 a year. The man who'd orchestrated my firing to save on operational costs was now troubleshooting email servers and installing printer drivers. But my personal vindication was just the beginning. 3 months after launching Marlowe Logic Systems, I'd done something that felt even better than watching Nexara Systems fail. I'd made my work public. I published the entire technical architecture of my original platform on GitHub, complete with documentation, performance benchmarks, and detailed explanations of every innovation I'd developed during my 9 years in Silicon Valley. The repository was titled, "The Real Nexara Platform, What They Tried to Keep." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Computer science students started using my code in their thesis projects. Startup founders reached out asking for consulting advice. Major tech companies offered me executive positions with salaries that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Most satisfying of all, dozens of former Nexara Systems employees contacted me to share their own stories of mistreatment and to ask about joining my team. One message particularly stood out. It came from David, the intern who'd first alerted me to the HR conference call about my termination. He'd graduated from Stanford and was now working at Google, but he wanted to thank me for what he called the most important lesson of my career. "You showed me that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing," he wrote. "It's about being prepared for when other people don't. The way you handled everything at Nexara Systems taught me that the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting better." 6 months later, TechCrunch published a comprehensive case study about the Nexara Systems collapse titled, "How One Termination Email Destroyed an $800 million Company." The article traced the entire timeline, from my hiring in 2015 through the company's bankruptcy filing in March 2025. It described my departure as the single most expensive HR decision in Silicon Valley history, and used the story as a cautionary tale about the importance of understanding your key personnel. The piece included interviews with industry analysts who estimated that Nexara Systems could have remained profitable indefinitely if they'd simply offered me a partnership stake instead of planning my termination. One expert calculated that the company lost approximately $89 million for every year I'd worked there, simply by failing to recognize that I was the foundation their entire business model was built on. But the most revealing quote came from a former Nexara Systems board member who spoke on condition of anonymity. "We kept asking Jeremy who could replace Alaric if something happened to him. Jeremy kept saying anyone could do that job, it was just coding. We should have been asking what would happen to the company if Alaric decided we couldn't replace him." Today, in September 2025, Marlowe Logic Systems employs 47 people across offices in Seattle, Austin, and Denver. Our annual revenue is approaching $30 million, and we're on track to go public within the next 2 years. Every employee owns equity in the company, and nobody works more than 50 hours per week unless they choose to. We've built something sustainable, something that values the people who make it possible. I never sued Nexara Systems. I never leaked confidential information or sabotaged their systems. I never even spoke publicly about my termination until the TechCrunch article was published, nearly a year after the fact. My revenge was simpler and more devastating than any legal action could have been. I let them discover what their company was worth without the person who'd built it. Sometimes I drive by the old Nexara Systems building in San Francisco, now occupied by a medical device startup that's doing genuinely innovative work. The building looks the same from the outside, but everything that once made it valuable is gone. It reminds me of something my grandfather used to say when I was growing up in Ohio. "Son, when somebody shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. And when they try to throw you away, make sure they can't put you back together." I spent 9 years building something I thought would last. In the end, I learned that the most important thing I'd built wasn't a platform or a system or a company. It was a reputation for integrity, competence, and strategic thinking that nobody could take away from me, no matter what they put in a termination email. The best part? I'm just getting started. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.